this week's edition of World Today, where we bring you the biggest international news of the week. We begin with the attack on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Israeli police stormed the Al-aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, one of Islam's holiest sites, for the second time on Wednesday, hours after they first raided the compound and arrested hundreds of Palestinians, sparking a wave of protests by Palestinians and condemnations and violence. Tension is already high in East Jerusalem and the West Bank for months, and fears of further violence were fueled with the convergence of the Muslim holy fast month of Ramadan and the Jewish Passover festival. It was not immediately clear what sparked the violence. The Israeli police said it used force to evacuate worshippers who were holed up at the mosque with fireworks, rocks and sticks. They claim that an officer was injured in his leg and dozens of rioters were arrested. Meanwhile, militants from Gaza responded with rocket fire on southern Israel, prompting an Israeli airstrike. The clashes took place as Muslims marked the holy month of Ramadan and Jews prepared to begin the Passover festival. Al-Aqsa is the third holiest site in Islam. The spot known to Jews as the Temple Mount is also the holiest site in Judaism, who revere it as the location of the biblical Jewish temples. And this is a World Today exclusive. On Spotlight this weekend, I'm being joined by Ambassador Ammar Hijazi, who is the Minister of State, which is an Assistant Minister for Multilateral Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Palestine. Ambassador Hijazi, many thanks for joining us here on World Today. We've seen a lot of reaction coming in from various quarters when it comes to these clashes by the Israeli forces, the raid, storming of the Al-aqsa Mosque. But according to you, do you think the reaction from the Arab world was good enough? We'll talk about the West, but first the Arab world.
Well, the Arab world was swift in its reaction to the events because they are extreme and they are very provocative at so many levels. There was a quick and swift movement at the level of the Security Council, the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Conference, led by the Arab states. Of course, more is needed always because of the intensity of the situation and because of the intensity of the crimes that are being committed, particularly under this racist government in Israel that have no respect to any kind of norms or values, particularly the respect to the rights of people to practice their religion and freely and to respect to the sanctuary of the noble sanctuary of the Al-Haram Sharif. The problem continues to be is that the state of affairs of the world is that we see double standards being applied to different cases around the world. We see the law is being applied very vigorously when it comes to other situations, while in this protracted situation of occupation, prolonged occupation, and violations of human rights that accompany it, and violations of international humanitarian law and all other norms and laws, we see no action in that regard. So much more is needed, and in this regard we'll be asking for more for sure.
Right. We will talk about the West, but before that, explain to our viewers, Ambassador Hijazi, what has happened in the past so many years. The sanctity of Al-Aqsa Mosque absolutely now in a shambles. We've seen the kind of raids and storming of the Al-Aqsa, which has never been seen in the past. Now we're seeing more of that happen. Every Ramadan, we see more attacks, more violence. Is this the new regime, the hardline faction within the government in Israel, the new government in Israel, the reason why we see an increase in these incidents?
Let me tell you that the continued occupation is the source of conflict and insecurity, and with it comes everything else. Security, I mean, that Israel claims does all of these kinds of crimes under the disguise of security, it certainly cannot be achieved through occupation and stripping others of their rights. The issue is that the protracted also absence of accountability is what led to the state of affairs that we see today. Right. Whether it is the failure of the political process, or whether it is the expansion of the colonial enterprise on the ground, which will deem the two-state solution impossible to achieve, or whether it is the attacks on the sanctuary and the sanctity of Al-aqsa Mosque and other religious places. I have to say, many Christian churches have been attacked in the past few months in a brazen way, with nobody held accountable. The absence of accountability and impunity is what's leading to the state of affairs we see today. And Israel feels that it is a state above law. It has the world opening its arms to it. Right. Countries are dealing with it as a normal state. They're buying from it and doing regular business with it as a normal state, while in other situations we see the situation completely different, where sanctions are applied and where countries are taking measures to respond to aggression and to violations of international law. So with this state of affairs, Israel is getting more brazen in its attacks and more vicious, and unfortunately we'll be seeing more of this in the coming days, months and years.
Right, which brings me to the larger question, Ambassador Hijazi. What is your expectation then from the world? You say that there have been Security Council resolutions. The Arab world has condemned, but thus far and no further when it comes to the kind of action we're seeing from the Israeli side. No country has really said that there could be action, there could be consequences to your actions. So what's Palestine's expectations till the time there is an actual resolution and a solution to this entire problem, the crisis and the two-state theory?
Well, you're correct. I mean, if all other nations that fell under colonial rule have applied the standards that they sit idle by and watch the occupiers and the colonizers do whatever they want, the state of affairs of the world and the whole world would have been different today. India has lived also under colonial regime, and it has freed itself from that colonial regime through the struggle of its people and the support of principled peoples around the world and countries. And this is what we rely on. We will continue to ensure that the international system is held accountable and is applied when it comes to its responsibilities and to what it should do as it relates to Israel's crimes. We will continue to pursue each and every venue available for us, legitimate venue that is, and to ensure that Israel is held accountable. This is a struggle that will continue. We are not going anywhere. The Palestinian people are determined to achieve their independence and freedom, and we will be invoking each and every principle and international organization to ensure that it upholds its responsibility. We are not there yet, but we think that we are slowly but surely heading there.
Well, a very strong message coming in. The Palestinians are not going anywhere. With that, Dr. Ammar Hijazi, many thanks for joining us here on World Today.
Thank you for having me.
It was a historic moment in the United States of America when for the first time ever a current or former president was indicted. This week saw the whole courtroom drama play out in New York, where a grand jury held an arraignment hearing. But what does this mean for Donald Trump, for the Republican Party, and more so for the Democrats, with an election on the horizon, inflation skyrocketing, China's constant provocation, and the Russian aggression? Was it the best time to see a Trump indictment? And why is this different from Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign case, where the federal election regulators merely fined Hillary Clinton for not properly disclosing the money they spent on controversial opposition research that led to the infamous Trump-Russia dossier? The DNC was fined $105,000 and the Clinton campaign was fined merely $8,000. No arrest, no indictment.
On April 4th, former US President Donald Trump was arrested and charged with 34 felony counts related to business fraud. The case comes as he campaigns to become president once again in the 2024 elections. With Trump supporters outside the Manhattan court and massive security deployment across the city, it was a massive spectacle. The charges relate to a $130,000 payment made to buy the silence of adult film actress Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 elections that Trump won against Hillary Clinton. Trump pleaded not guilty.
God bless you all. God bless you all. And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
Interestingly, it was on the same day that Trump's bête noire, Hillary Clinton, was honored by the Lotus Club at a dinner 10 blocks from the Trump Tower. Many are questioning the treatment meted out to Trump as opposed to Hillary Clinton for similar charges of financial impropriety during the 2016 presidential election.
There has never been anything like this where emails and you get a subpoena, and after getting the subpoena, you delete 33,000 emails. And then you acid wash them, or bleach them, as you would say, a very expensive process. Their lives have been destroyed for doing 1/5 of what you've done. And it's a disgrace. And honestly, you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Secretary Clinton, I want to follow up on that. I'm going to let you talk about email.
Because everything he just said is absolutely false, but I'm not surprised.
Really? Remember when the DNC and Hillary Clinton paid the law firm $1 million and said that it was for something else, and we found out later it wasn't. It was all about the Russia collusion. It wasn't for legal part. And so they went through and they got investigated. $1 million they spent. And you know what? At the end of the day, they didn't get prosecuted. They got fined. Hillary's campaign got fined $8,000. And the DNC got fined $100,000. Even though they used $1 million, they knowingly hid the fact of what they were doing to try to hide. They got investigated. So I look at it from this perspective. We live in America and it should be equal justice.
With the indictment, the former president has tightened his grip on the Republican Party base and boxed his rivals into lineup behind him. His campaign donations are up, $7 million and counting, have already poured into his coffers since the indictment, and his email appeals have become more frequent.
Other aspirants seeking the Republican Party nomination have been forced to defend Trump because the legal case against Trump has created a new wave of sympathy for him, and they can't be seen to be going against him. This is only the latest twist in the American political saga, which is no longer a linear, straightforward story where the two parties duke it out fairly. Allegations of election interference and voter intimidation are common.
Trump earlier faced two major inquiries by Congress when he was president, called impeachments, but was acquitted by the US Senate both times. As former president, he can no longer be impeached, but instead can be indicted. The opposition is garnering support by calling this political persecution.
Not using language that incites.
Guys, here's what we're going to talk about today. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the insufficiency of this case. And I will say this to you. Today's unsealing of this indictment shows that the rule of law died in this country. Because while everyone is not above the law, no one's below it either. And if this man's name was not Donald J. Trump, there is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that based on these charges.
What does this mean for the future of American politics?
As a former prosecutor, I believe that no one is above the law, even a former president. But I do wonder if we're opening up a political Pandora's box. If Republicans regain control of the White House, Are they going to prosecute individuals like Hunter or Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton? Is this an unprecedented first step that is going to harm our criminal justice system and our democracy?
For now, Trump and his battery of lawyers are planning their next course of action. But Stormy Daniels was the least of their worries. There are other cases against him that are far more grave. Meanwhile, this setback will not stop Trump from continuing his election campaign under the US Constitution. In fact, he could theoretically still run for president and win an election, even if he was imprisoned.
After months of delay and dilly-dallying, Turkey finally approved Finland's application to join NATO, making it the 31st member of the military alliance and doubling the length of member states' borders with Russia. While Ankara agreed to admit Finland, it continues to block Sweden from joining the military alliance. What does this mean for Russia and the war? More so, what does it mean to the neutrality doctrine that a handful of European nations held dearly and survived in the 21st century without risking sovereignty or territorial integrity?
NATO welcomed Finland as its 31st member in a flag-raising ceremony at its Brussels headquarters. Finnish President Sauli Niinisto and his government ministers were present for this historic moment. A win for the West and a snub to Russia.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you, Secretary Blinken. Now when I've got this invitation, it's my great pleasure to deposit with the Secretary of State of the United States of America, Finland's instrument of accession to the North Atlantic Treaty. Please, Secretary Blinken.
Thank you very much. Well, with receipt of this instrument of accession, we can now declare that Finland is the 31st member of the North Atlantic Treaty.
Following Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, two formerly neutral European states, Finland and Sweden, sought NATO membership to safeguard their borders in order to keep Moscow at bay.
Finland has lodged saying that their soil will not be used against Russia. But should there be a situation where NATO decides to counter Russia, then these waters, Gulf of Finland, as also the border between Finland and Russia, that is about 1,340 kilometers long, is something that certainly would become a worry and concern for Russia.
A defiant Russia has said that these Western maneuvers will not impact the outcome of the war in Ukraine.
NATO is taking a range of steps. They are intensifying combat training and reconnaissance activities near the borders of Russia and Belarus. All this creates a risk of a significant escalation of the conflict. But it will not affect the outcome of the special military operation.
NATO says it has an open-door policy, meaning any country willing to uphold the principles of the bloc's founding treaty can become a member. However, under the accession rules, any member state can veto a new country from joining. Turkey and Hungary held out on their consent for the longest time, finally relenting for Finland, but not for Sweden. For Turkey, the problem is Sweden's lack of action against supporters of Kurdish militants. Erdogan had previously said Turkey would not approve Sweden's NATO membership unless the country extradites terrorists upon Turkey's request. Sweden has made clear this won't happen, and for now, the process is stuck.
Nothing should hinder or be an obstacle for also the final ratification of also Sweden to become a member. This is a top priority for the alliance. This is important for me personally, and all allies agree that we should try to finalize the accession also of Sweden as soon as possible.
The United States and other NATO countries are hoping that Sweden becomes a member of the alliance at a NATO summit due to be held on July the 11th in Lithuania's capital, Vilnius. Finland's accession brings NATO significant military capabilities developed over the years, as it is one of the few European countries to have retained a conscription army through decades of peace, wary of Russia next door. In addition, Finland's ground, naval and air forces are all trained and equipped with one primary aim: to repel any Russian attack. With Finland a part of NATO and Sweden's application in process, there are only 4 remaining traditional neutrals in Europe: Austria, Ireland, Malta and Switzerland. Barring Switzerland, the other 3 have already sided with Ukraine in the war, while maintaining neutrality militarily, even if not politically.
And here are some other stories from across the world and World at a Glance.
French President Emmanuel Macron on Thursday said that he counted on China to bring Russia to reason over its invasion of Ukraine. Talking about bilateral relations, the French president acknowledged the differences that can exist between our models, but expressed hope that any issues could be discussed, as always, in a very frank and respectful way. French officials had said earlier that President planned to urge Xi to use Beijing's influence with Russian President Vladimir Putin to promote peace in Ukraine, but expected no major change in China's position. A Paris restaurant patronized by French President Emmanuel Macron during the 2017 election, where he first won office, was damaged during a pension reform protest on Thursday. Although the bulk of the demonstration in the capital was peaceful, there were sporadic chaotic scenes as the march wound its way through the capital. Macron's drive to raise the national retirement age from 62 to 64 has ignited a months-long firestorm of public anger. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy welcomed Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen for a historic meeting on US soil on Wednesday. McCarthy greeted Tsai on her arrival at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Southern California. Tsai, making the most sensitive stop on a week-long journey meant to shore up alliances in the US and Central America, was to meet with both Democratic and Republican lawmakers. China views any interaction between US and Taiwanese officials as a challenge to its claim to the island as its territory. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had filed papers to run for US President in 2024 as a Democrat. The 69-year-old is the son of assassinated Senator Robert F. Kennedy and nephew of President John F. Kennedy. The NBA had announced BTS star Suga to be the brand new NBA ambassador for the rest of the 2022 and 23 season. The rapper, songwriter and the producer is a huge basketball fan, and his love for the game has been publicized in his music career.
That's all in this edition of World Today. Stay tuned for all the news and latest updates. Take care and goodbye.